natural, ceramics, grits, guided systems, stropping, compound slurry stones, tangs, lubrications, those goddamn Moras, lock types, boomers, more stropping, safety, magnetic north, true north, automatic, quartz, potassium, TSA compliance. These are many of the reoccurring questions when talking about knife sharpening. We can skip the more detailed questions here in the beginning and just talk about the basics, which is geometry of the blade and the edge. A knife can be dulled in two different ways, either through chipping as represented by the straight edge, or through just natural wear and tear of the edge. There are many different knife grinds, but in this video I am just going to talk about 3 different knife grinds. Scandi, which is just one large secondary edge without any extra grinds on it. A flat grind where the apex is a bit steeper than the main bevel. And convex, where the bevels are a bit rounded, as the name implies. I am aware that I skipped over a couple of grinds. I really recommend A.G. Russell's website. He has a really good article about different blade grinds. So as I stated earlier, the 2 main reasons why a knife goes dull is either because of chipping, where an impact has been done to the apex of the knife, therefore removing a small chip, hence the name chipping, from the edge of the blade. This is by far, in my opinion, the worst type of damage to repair on a knife, just because of the amount of material you have to remove to straighten out a chip in a blade. Or the second reason for a knife going dull, which is just through normal wear and tear, where the apex of the knife, which once was pointy, now is kind of rounded. And the further you go without sharpening the apex, straightening it out, the more work you'll have to do later on. Which is why I recommend sharpening knives every now and then and just keeping them sharp. Now, what makes a knife sharp is actually just the straightness of the apex. In this picture you can see that the apex or the point of the edge is kind of folded over. This tends to happen when you're sharpening a knife, and this is called the burr. If you're sharpening correctly, the burr should go back and forth from one side to the other, and the amount of overhang from the burr should shrink as you go up into finer sharpening grits and pretty much remove it completely at the end when you strop the blade. So how do you sharpen a knife? Well, I learned how to sharpen a knife on a whetstone, freehand, and I think the best way really to learn this is through trial and error. If you can, get like a really cheap kitchen knife or something, and don't worry if you ruin it. That way if you keep practicing on the same kitchen knife, you can see your improvements as you go on. So if you're just starting out knife sharpening, I really recommend you go to your local hardware store and see if you can find one of those double-sided grey aluminum oxide sharpening stones that cost under 10 euros. They're a really good way to learn how to sharpen. They tend to wear out pretty fast, but they remove quite a lot of material pretty fast, and that way you will also learn not to use too much force when you're sharpening. Now I'm gonna show you how I sharpen a knife. Today we're using a Scandinavian grind or a Scandi grind. As you can see, the main bevel or grind goes way further up than on your flat ground knives. Now I am coloring in the main bevel of the knife. I do this so that I can see that the main bevel of the knife is in line with the sharpening stone. This is something I really recommend for beginners. The knife I am demonstrating on is a Mora Companion. This is in 12C27 stainless steel, which is a fairly decent steel. After I figured out the right angle for the knife, I just go back and forth on the stone, and I don't use too much pressure. The stone we're using right now is a Norton 1000 grit stone. It's a really good in-between stone for when your knives just need some sharpening but they're not too damaged. Now there are many different steels and no one acts the same as another. Therefore some might be much harder to sharpen where some are really easy to sharpen. This varies depending on the steel composition or the hardness of the steel. One thing to keep in mind is to use the right grit for the right amount of resharpening that needs to be done. For example, if you just want to touch up a blade, you don't want to use the roughest of grits. And if you have a really damaged blade, you'll be sharpening for a long time if you're using some super high grit instead. One thing that tends to be overlooked, especially by beginners, but professionals too, is stropping. Now, there are different methods of stropping. I prefer to use this homemade strop that I made out of a leather belt glued to a piece of wood, and then I apply some polishing compound. I don't know the grit of this compound, but I've used this for years now. A piece of this costs about 10 euros and it'll last you half a lifetime. Now the point with stropping is to remove the burr and polish the edge. Even if you've used a really high grit stone, the stropping can make a day and night difference with sharpness. So if you take these things into consideration when sharpening a knife, you should end up with something that's really sharp. Thanks for watching everyone. Take care.